Welcome back, boys and girls, as I continue reading Great Reef Games, Chapter 3, Sailing in the Sky. The trip was choppy. The yacht pitched against the waves for almost an hour. Sage couldn't sit still, so she went up to the dock where she was spritzed by the sea's spray. When the boat chugged to a stop, Sage searched the horizon. She spotted a small, lush island with a ring of sand all around, but it was too far away to swim. She stormed down the ship's stairs to find Javier sitting with the rest of the team. "What's up?" she demanded. "We're here, right? Did we get another clue?" "Give it a minute and you'll figure out what to do," Javier answered. "Why don't you put on a wetsuit while you wait? It'll keep you from getting too cold and it will protect you from box jellyfish." "Jellyfish?" Russell repeated, his body straightening with a jerk. "Those things are super venomous. No way I'm going in that water if there are jellyfish." "You're right," Javier agreed without sounding concerned. "Some species are extremely toxic. One touch of a tentacle can kill you, but they aren't common in winter months. We'll all be on the lookout, and the suit is good protection. If you see one, everyone has to get out. Pronto." The other three were busy forcing their limbs into the thick fabric of the wetsuits, but Russell was full of doubt. "Don't worry, man," Dev tried to reassure his teammate. "If you get stung, we can just pee on you." He tried to keep a straight face. "I read that pee can neutralize the toxins." "That's an old wives' tale," Mary said as she pulled her braid from the back of her suit. "White vinegar is what doctors use to recommend, but even that might make the tentacles release more venom. The treatment is complicated, so it's best just to avoid getting stung altogether." "Exactly," Russell said, his face expressionless. "And not just because I don't want Dev to pee on me." Sage was just as relieved as Russell that Mary had dispelled the rumor. "If you're worried, check the water for tiny animals that look like shrimp," Mary suggested. "You probably aren't going to find any jellyfish if they can't find any food." Sage watched as Russell scanned the waves around the boat. It was obvious how much he trusted Mary's advice, because he heaved a sigh of relief. The water looked clear. Just then, a motorboat appeared from behind the nearby island. Javier waved it down. "Get ready for your first challenge," he announced. He held out a canvas box and raised the lid. Inside was what looked like a smartphone with a short antenna. "The ANCAM," Dev declared, plunging his hand into the box. "You sound so excited," Russell said in a mocking tone. Dev had hated the ANCAM at first, but had quickly mastered the tiny device that combined a walkie-talkie and camera. It was how they received directions and clues from the race organizers. It was also how they submitted their answers so they could move on to the next clue. "It's time," said Javier. Get yourselves over to that boat. You got it? Sage asked Dev, making sure he would take charge of their communications device. Dev held up the in cam and gave a confident grin. Sage instinctively checked for both earrings, then dove in. The chill of the water made everything feel real. The race really was on now. With powerful strokes, she made her way to the other vessel. After she climbed the ladder to the small deck, she looked back at her teammates. Dev wasn't far behind. His thick black hair was even straighter than usual, wet against his dark skin. Russell, despite his athletic frame and busy schedule of team sports, did not appear to be a strong swimmer. His kick was sloppy and his breathing lacked an even rhythm. But Mary was struggling even more. When she finally reached the ladder, Sage reached out and gave her a hand. Mary looked disoriented with the sea salt water streaming down her tanned face. You okay? Sage asked. I think so, Mary answered, immediately sitting on the bench at the side of the deck. Sage turned to the boat's captain and her first mate. Both wore long-sleeved rash guards for sun protection. With the same sparkly blue eyes and space between their front teeth, they looked like mother and son. Hi, Sage said. We're part of the wildlife. We know, answered the woman. That's why we're here. I'm Gail. This is Cole. We've got our next clue, Dev announced, holding up the ANCAM. I'll read it. 2 will start by flying high to get a prime view from the sky. Search and it will be no fluke when your team sights a true fluke. Yuck. They need to get new writers, Dev declared. You can't rhyme a word with the same word. But they have different meanings, Mary insisted. It doesn't matter. It's horrendous and embarrassing. Who cares? Sage called out, throwing up her arms. We have a clue. She turned back to Gail. Is this a parasail boat? She asked, eyeing the gear near the boat's stern. Sure is. I need 2 volunteers. Dev, you should come with me, Sage said as she grabbed a pair of binoculars. When he paused, she added, You're the one with the ANCAM. Dev looked to Mary and Russell, then stepped into place next to Sage. There was a blur of buckles and snaps and straps as they put on life jackets and harnesses. Mary, any advice? Sage asked. Well, Mary began, there are fish called flukes, but I don't think any live around here or are big enough to see from way up there. Mary squinted as she looked into the sky. So you must be looking for a whale fluke. 2 flukes make up a whale's tail. You can see them when humpback whales breach. That's when they throw themselves out of the water. It's really beautiful. Sage nodded. Maybe she should have chosen Mary to parasail with her. But Dev was the techie. She knew he'd get the best shot. Now it's time to see humpbacks, Mary continued. They've just migrated. Even in winter, the Great Barrier Reef is warmer than the Antarctic. With breakneck speed, Gale and Cole latch Sage into place on the small gondola. It reminded Sage of a ski lift. Dev paused several steps away. His eyes seemed to be darting around, focusing on one thing and then another. At last, he came forward so Gale and Cole could strap him in too. With the pull of a lever, Gale released the parachute, which billowed behind the boat. The sail lifted and took Sage and Dev with it. Sage felt her stomach lurch. "What are you looking at back there?" she asked. "I was trying to figure out if this thing was..." "Safe," Dev yelled over the swirling wind. "My dad would freak out if he could see me." "Why?" "He's an engineer. He is very concerned with the way things work." Sage had been so set on the race that she hadn't even paused to think about safety. With all that happened in the last year, she was surprised she hadn't considered it. But her focus was always on the finish line. "Remember, we're looking for whales," she said, concentrating on things she could control. "Breaching whales so that we can see a fluke." Sage took in the full view. They were now hundreds of feet in the air. Below them, the water was deep blue. Toward the mainland, she could see the reef. The water there was shallow and appeared much brighter. She could see how it was many reefs hugging the coast. They looked like turquoise jewels from up high, strung together like an expensive necklace. It was hard to believe that something so big was alive, and that the animals that made the reef were so tiny. "It's amazing up here," Sage yelled. The wind plastered loose strands of sun-bleached hair across her face. "Yeah," Dev agreed. "I wish Russell and Mary could see it." "Yeah," she said. "Check it out," Dave demanded, pointing at the Ancam. They added a telephoto lens. They kind of had to. "We can never get a decent whale shot without it." Mary had told them that she had read in the folder about how there was a buffer zone for whale watching. No boat could get within 100 yards of a whale for safety reasons. Dev lifted the handheld device to his eye and tried to focus in on something below. "Hey, look," he said excitedly. "What?" Sage asked hopefully. "Russell's driving the boat." "I thought you were worried about safety," Sage said. "They won't let him do anything drastic," Dev answered. But just as he said it, the gondola took a dip. "Whoa!" Sage yelled. It felt like all her organs had jumped into her throat. "What was that?" Dev scanned the water surface. They must have spotted something. Sage peered through her binoculars. "It's too bright. I can't see anything." Dev leaned forward, and Cam at the ready. "That's probably why they slowed down, so we would drop and get a better view." "Really?" Sage thought Russell was just messing with them, wasting time. They dipped again. and Sage saw a white spotted whale tail disappear under the sapphire blue water. "There!" Sage yelled. Almost immediately, a smaller whale torpedoed out of the water. The young whale raised its fin in the air. Then it landed sideways with a bubbly white splash. The last thing to appear was the tail, marked with white splotches and a ruffled trim. Dev's fingers worked quickly. Click, click, click. "Did you get it?" Dev held out the Ancam, and they looked at the shots. "They're kinds of blurry," Sage said with a concern. "But that one's the best." "Cross your fingers," Dev murmured and punched send. The parasail had been descending at a steady rate, and Russell was still driving the boat. "We're about to hit the water," said Sage. "He'll pull off," Dev said, unconcerned. He'd better, Sage thought, because this wasn't some joyride. They needed to be in position to take another picture, in case the first one wasn't approved. Sage shivered as her toes dragged in the chilly water, and then the boat sped up. Within seconds, the wind had lifted the parachute and gondola 100 feet. "It was approved!" Dev called out. "Phew!" Sage cried and gave a signal for Cole to reel them in. She could wait until they were safe on board the boat and reunited with Russell and Mary to hear the next clue. Creature feature: humpback whales. Scientific name: Megaptera novilingeli. Type: mammal. Range: Arctic, Atlantic, and Pacific Oceans. Food: plankton, small crustaceans, and fish. Humpback whales are not fish. They don't have gills. Like other mammals, they have lungs. A humpback whale breathes through 2 blowholes on top of its head and can stay underwater for up to 20 minutes. Humpbacks migrate every year from frigid waters near the poles to more tropical waters where they feed on plankton, krill, and small fish. As a type of a baleen whale, they do not have teeth, but have baleen plates, which are like giant toothbrush-style filters that trap small food in the whale's mighty mouth. While humpbacks have big blue bodies, their fins are often partially white. Their tails can be marked with white as well. These special markings and the notches at the ends of the tail are unique to each whale, like a human's fingerprint. Scientists use these details to keep track of whales in the wild.